You are not disturbed by people, but by your need for their judgment over your own reason. You already feel it in daily moments when a glance changes your mood or a comment reshapes your thinking before you even examine it. Today you learn the art of ignoring what does not deserve your attention and keeping only what strengthens your virtue. This is not withdrawal from life, but return to self-governance where your mind answers only to reason and not to noise. If this is the kind of discipline you are ready to practice, then join this space and subscribe so you stay close to teachings that train the inner life, not the outer reaction. What follows is not comfort, but clarity, and it will show you how much of your suffering begins where your attention is misused. Number 1. Distinguish what belongs to your control today. Look carefully at your life before you look at anyone else. Before you blame another person for your frustration. Before you explain why you feel angry, ignored, rejected, insulted, or exhausted. Stop and ask yourself a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What exactly is under your control right now? Not tomorrow. Not when circumstances improve. Not when people finally understand you. Not when the world becomes fair. Right now. Most people never ask this question with complete honesty. They wake up and immediately hand over their peace to things that do not belong to them. They surrender their mood to a comment. They surrender their confidence to an opinion. They surrender their direction to the approval of strangers. Then they wonder why they feel weak. The truth is difficult because it demands responsibility. You are disturbed far less by events than by the judgments you attach to them. Someone ignores your message. That is an event. You decide it means you are unimportant. That is a judgment. Someone criticizes your work. That is an event. You decide it proves your inadequacy. That is a judgment. Someone disagrees with your choices. That is an event. You decide it threatens your worth. That is a judgment. The event arrives from outside. The judgment is created within, and that difference changes everything. The first lesson of a disciplined life is learning to separate what belongs to you from what does not. Your thoughts belong to you. Your choices belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your character belongs to you. Your willingness to act with courage belongs to you. Your willingness to speak truthfully belongs to you. Your willingness to remain just when treated unjustly belongs to you. These things are yours, but the opinions of others are not yours. The emotions of others are not yours. The decisions of others are not yours. The reputation others give you is not yours. The praise they offer is not yours. The criticism they offer is not yours. The outcome of your efforts is not entirely yours. The sooner you accept this division, the sooner your life begins to change. Many people hear this and immediately resist it, because they have spent years trying to control what was never theirs to control. They try to manage how every person perceives them. They try to guarantee success before taking action. They try to eliminate uncertainty. They try to avoid discomfort. They try to arrange reality according to personal preference, and reality refuses to cooperate. Then they become angry, not because life betrayed them, because they demanded ownership over things they never possessed. Look honestly at your last week. How much energy did you spend worrying about another person's opinion? How much energy did you spend replaying conversations that already ended? How much energy did you spend imagining future outcomes you could not guarantee? How much energy did you spend wishing people would behave differently? This is the tragedy of an undisciplined mind. It exhausts itself trying to rule territory that belongs to nobody. Meanwhile, the territory that actually belongs to it remains neglected. A person spends hours worrying about criticism, but spends no time examining character. A person obsesses over reputation, but ignores conduct. A person fears judgment, but refuses self-improvement. A person wants control over the world, while lacking control over attention. This is why so many people feel powerless. not because they lack strength, because they misdirect it. Imagine a man carrying water across a desert. If he pours it into the sand every day, he cannot complain about thirst. Most people pour their mental energy into things beyond their authority and then wonder why they feel empty. The mind becomes stronger when it focuses only on what it can govern. This is not passive acceptance. It is disciplined attention. It is the refusal to waste life. The world constantly invites you away from yourself. Every insult invites reaction. Every disagreement invites emotional surrender. Every setback invites self-pity. Every uncertainty invites anxiety. The invitation arrives every day. You do not control whether the invitation appears. You control whether you accept it. That distinction is freedom. The moment you understand this deeply, you stop living as a hostage to circumstance. Consider how much suffering comes from demanding certainty. A person wants a guarantee before acting, a guarantee that effort will succeed, a guarantee that love will be returned, a guarantee that sacrifice will be rewarded, a guarantee that courage will produce victory. But life offers no such contract. The outcome remains uncertain. Only the choice remains yours. The disciplined person understands this. They do not measure themselves by results alone. They measure themselves by the quality of their choices. They ask different questions. Did I act honorably? Did I speak truthfully? Did I remain self-controlled? Did I fulfill my duty? Did I use reason rather than impulse? These questions belong to them. The final outcome does not. When your attention shifts toward what belongs to you, something remarkable happens. You become harder to disturb. Not because problems disappear, because your standards change. You no longer expect control over events. You expect responsibility for your response. This creates stability. Imagine two people receiving identical criticism. One immediately becomes defensive. The criticism controls his mood for days. He replays every word. He imagines arguments. He seeks validation. His peace becomes dependent upon changing another person's mind. The second person pauses. He asks whether the criticism contains truth. If it does, he learns. If it does not, he releases it. Either way, he remains focused on his own conduct. One person surrendered authority. The other retained it. The difference is not circumstance. The difference is judgment. Your mind must be trained to recognize this in real time, not after the emotional storm. During it, when anger rises, ask yourself what belongs to you. The event has already happened. The behavior of another person belongs to them. The only thing remaining under your authority is your response. When anxiety rises, ask yourself what belongs to you. The future remains uncertain. The outcome remains unknown. The only thing available now is your present choice. When envy rises, ask yourself what belongs to you. Another person's success belongs to their path. Your responsibility remains your own character. Again and again, return to this question. What belongs to me right now? This question cuts through confusion. This question exposes illusion. This question restores discipline. Most people imagine freedom means having unlimited options. True freedom is different. True freedom begins when you stop demanding ownership over what was never yours. A person chained to public opinion is not free. A person controlled by fear of rejection is not free. A person dependent upon praise is not free. A person unable to tolerate uncertainty is not free. Freedom exists when your inner state is governed by reason rather than circumstance. This is why self-examination is essential. Every evening, sit alone. Remove distraction. Review your day honestly. Ask yourself where you surrendered authority. Where did another person's opinion govern your emotions? Where did you demand certainty? Where did you become upset over something beyond your control? Where did you neglect your own responsibilities while focusing on others? Do not judge yourself harshly. Judge yourself accurately. Accuracy creates growth. Excuses create stagnation. The purpose of examination is not guilt. The purpose is correction. A sailor checks direction not because he hates the ship, but because he wants to reach the destination. Examine yourself with the same seriousness. Each day offers opportunities to practice. When someone interrupts you, practice patience. When someone misunderstands you, practice clarity. When someone criticizes you, practice self-command. When circumstances disappoint you, practice acceptance. When fear appears, practice courage. These opportunities are not obstacles to philosophy. They are philosophy. A person who speaks wisely but collapses under inconvenience has learned words, not principles. Character is revealed under pressure. The moment of irritation reveals discipline. The moment of uncertainty reveals trust in reason. The moment of temptation reveals priorities. Life continuously tests what you claim to believe. Most people fail these tests because they never trained beforehand. They expect wisdom to appear automatically. It does not. Wisdom requires practice. Just as the body grows through repeated effort, the mind grows through repeated correction. Every time you return attention to what belongs to you, strength increases. Every time you refuse unnecessary reaction, strength increases. Every time you accept reality instead of arguing with it, strength increases. Every time you choose virtue over comfort, strength increases. This growth is gradual. Do not expect immediate perfection. Expect daily improvement. The desire for instant transformation is itself a form of impatience. You have spent years strengthening habits of distraction, resentment, worry, and emotional dependence. Do not be surprised when they resist change. Your task is not to become perfect overnight. Your task is to become slightly more governed today than yesterday. A person who makes this commitment possesses enormous power, not power over others, power over self, and no power exceeds it. Consider the individual who cannot be manipulated by praise. Consider the individual who cannot be destroyed by criticism. Consider the individual who remains calm during uncertainty. Consider the individual who acts according to principle, even when nobody approves. Such a person becomes difficult to intimidate because their stability comes from within. They are no longer negotiating with every passing opinion. They are no longer seeking permission to act rightly. They understand their responsibility, and they fulfill it. This is the foundation of inner strength, not domination, not status, not recognition, not influence. Strength begins when attention returns home. Every day the world will attempt to pull your attention outward. News will demand outrage. People will demand reaction. Circumstances will demand fear. Temptation will demand surrender. The question is not whether these pressures will appear. They will. The question is whether you remember what belongs to you. Your judgment belongs to you. Your choices belong to you. Your conduct belongs to you. Your character belongs to you. Protect these carefully. Everything else is secondary. Many people reach the end of life without learning this lesson. They spend decades chasing approval. They spend decades fearing criticism. They spend decades resenting reality. They spend decades arguing with circumstances. Then time runs out. Do not follow them. You have less time than you imagine. This day is already leaving. The hours are already disappearing. The opportunities for virtue are passing moment by moment. Do not waste them attempting to govern what was never yours. Govern yourself. That task alone is large enough for a lifetime. When you wake tomorrow morning, before speaking to anyone else, ask a simple question. What belongs to me today? Your answer should be clear. Your judgments, your choices, your actions, your character. Then spend the day guarding those things as carefully as a person guards a treasure, because they are your treasure. Everything meaningful in your life depends upon them, not reputation. not popularity, not comfort, not control over events, only the quality of the soul that meets those events. And the soul becomes strong when it stops chasing authority over the world and begins exercising authority over itself. The undisciplined person spends life demanding obedience from reality. The disciplined person accepts reality and governs personal conduct. One lives in frustration, the other lives in freedom. One wastes strength fighting what cannot be controlled. The other invests strength where it matters. One becomes a servant of circumstance. The other becomes master of self. Today you must choose which person you will be, not in theory, not in imagination, not someday, today, because every moment you spend trying to control what does not belong to you is a moment taken from the work that does, and the work that does belong to you cannot wait. Your character is being formed now. Your habits are being formed now. Your judgments are being formed now. Your life is being formed now. So stop looking outward for the source of your peace. Stop waiting for people to change. Stop demanding certainty from the future. Stop asking the world to arrange itself according to your wishes. Return to yourself. Return to reason. Return to responsibility. Return to the only territory that has ever truly belonged to you. Then govern it with unwavering discipline. For the person who learns to distinguish what belongs to their control today has already taken the first step toward a freedom that no criticism can steal, no setback can destroy, and no circumstance can take away. Number 2. Reject every judgment rooted in others' opinions. There is a quiet form of slavery that many people carry their entire lives without recognizing it. No chains are visible, no prison walls surround them, yet their peace rises and falls according to the opinions of other people. A compliment lifts them, a criticism wounds them, approval gives them confidence, disapproval takes it away. They call this normal. They call this human nature. They rarely stop long enough to see what has happened. They have handed authority over their inner life to strangers. Look carefully at your own mind. How many of your decisions have been shaped by fear of what someone else might think? How many opportunities have you avoided because another person's judgment seemed more important than your own reason? How many times have you remained silent when truth should have been spoken because you wanted acceptance more than integrity? These questions are uncomfortable because they reveal a fact that most people spend years avoiding. The opinions of others have been governing them more than their own principles. This is where the Stoic path begins. It begins with the refusal to accept every impression that enters the mind. Most people assume that because a thought appears, it must be true. Because an emotion arrives, it must be obeyed. Because a judgment forms automatically, it must be accepted. Yet the disciplined mind understands something different. Not every judgment deserves agreement. Not every reaction deserves expression. Not every thought deserves trust. When another person criticizes you, an impression appears. The mind immediately wants to declare that something terrible has happened. It wants to conclude that your value has been diminished. It wants to convince you that your worth now depends upon correcting their opinion. But pause for a moment. What has actually happened? A sound entered your ears, words were spoken, an opinion was expressed. Everything after that is being created inside your own judgment. The undisciplined person never notices this process. They merge with every reaction. They become whatever emotion arrives. They become anger when insulted. They become fear when criticized. They become pride when praised. Their inner condition changes with every passing voice. They live as servants of external approval without ever admitting it. The disciplined person examines each judgment before accepting it. They understand that another person's opinion is evidence only of that person's thinking. It is not evidence of truth. It is not evidence of reality. It is not evidence of your character. It is simply a report about what exists in another mind. This distinction changes everything. Imagine someone calls you incompetent. Most people immediately begin suffering. They either become defensive or discouraged, yet neither reaction begins with reason. The suffering begins because a judgment was accepted without examination. The mind immediately concluded that the statement must define reality. The disciplined person asks a different question. Is it true? If the criticism contains truth, then it becomes useful instruction. Improvement is now possible. Nothing harmful has occurred. A weakness has been revealed and can be corrected. If the criticism is false, then there is equally no reason for disturbance. Falsehood cannot damage character. An inaccurate opinion changes nothing essential about who you are. In both cases, emotional surrender becomes unnecessary. Notice how much suffering disappears when judgment is replaced by examination. The world constantly presents opinions. Some are favorable, some are hostile, some are careless, some are thoughtful, yet none of them possess authority over your character unless you grant it. This is why the Stoic student trains attention so carefully. The battle is not against other people. The battle is against the habit of accepting impressions without scrutiny. Many people spend years chasing a reputation they cannot control. They want everyone to admire them. They want universal approval. They want protection from criticism. They want certainty that they will be understood. Yet these desires place peace in the hands of others. The moment your happiness depends upon another person's opinion, your freedom disappears. Consider how unstable such a life becomes. One person praises you today and criticizes you tomorrow. One group supports you this year and rejects you next year. Public opinion changes constantly because human judgment is often driven by emotion, ignorance, preference, and misunderstanding. Why would you build your peace upon something so unstable? Reason demands a firmer foundation. Your task is not to manage what every person thinks about you. Your task is to ensure that your own actions remain honorable. One responsibility belongs to you, the other does not. A person can misunderstand your motives. A person can question your decisions. A person can dislike you without cause. None of these things prevent you from acting with courage. None prevent honesty. None prevent self-control. None prevent justice. The essential work remains available regardless of public opinion. This realization removes a tremendous burden. You no longer need to spend every day defending yourself before the court of human approval. You no longer need to explain every decision. You no longer need universal agreement before acting according to reason. Many people exhaust themselves attempting to correct every misunderstanding. They treat each criticism as an emergency. They treat every negative opinion as a threat. As a result, they spend their lives reacting instead of living. The disciplined mind chooses differently. It asks whether an opinion requires action. If correction is needed, correction is made. If no correction is needed, attention returns immediately to the duties of the present moment. This requires practice because the desire for approval is deeply rooted. The mind wants reassurance, it wants validation, it wants certainty that it is accepted. Yet dependence upon validation creates weakness because it places your emotional state beyond your authority. Strength emerges when self-respect becomes more important than public approval. Self-respect does not come from believing you are superior. It comes from knowing that your actions align with your principles. It comes from examining yourself honestly. It comes from correcting faults without excuses. It comes from living according to reason even when applause is absent. At the beginning of each morning, perform a simple exercise. Before entering the demands of the day, remind yourself that you will encounter opinions. Some will be favorable, some will not. Some will be fair, some will be careless. Tell yourself in advance that none of these opinions possess the power to determine your character. Then ask a better question. What kind of person will I choose to be regardless of what others think? This question directs attention back toward what matters. During the day, watch your mind carefully. Notice moments when approval becomes tempting. Notice moments when criticism creates discomfort. Notice how quickly judgment forms. Do not condemn yourself for these reactions. Observe them. Study them. Bring them into the light of reason. The goal is not emotional numbness. The goal is freedom from automatic obedience. An opinion appears. You pause. You examine. You decide whether agreement is justified. Only then do you respond. This pause is one of the most valuable disciplines available to you. Within that brief space between impression and judgment lies the possibility of self-governance. Without that pause, you become reactive. With that pause, you become deliberate. There is also an evening practice that strengthens this discipline. Before sleep, review the day honestly. Ask yourself where another person's opinion disturbed your peace. Ask where you became defensive. Ask where you sought approval unnecessarily. Ask where fear of judgment influenced your choices. Then ask a second question. What judgment was I accepting in that moment? This question goes deeper than behavior. It reveals the hidden beliefs directing your reactions. Perhaps you believed criticism makes you less valuable. Perhaps you believed disagreement threatens your identity. Perhaps you believed approval is necessary for confidence. Bring these beliefs into the open and examine them carefully. Most cannot survive honest scrutiny. A person does not become better because they are praised. A person does not become worse because they are criticized. Character changes through choices. Virtue grows through action. Integrity develops through discipline. The opinions of others can describe these things accurately or inaccurately, but they do not create them. Remember this whenever the mind begins chasing acceptance. You are not here to collect approval. You are not here to manage every perception. You are not here to construct an image that satisfies every observer. You are here to govern your own judgments. You are here to discipline your own choices. You are here to improve your own character. Everything else is secondary. The greatest danger is not that people will think badly of you. The greatest danger is that you will think badly and never examine it. The greatest danger is not criticism from outside. The greatest danger is confusion within. The greatest danger is allowing untested judgments to rule your life while believing yourself free. Freedom begins when reason becomes stronger than the desire for approval. Freedom begins when you stop measuring yourself through borrowed opinions. Freedom begins when you recognize that another person's judgment belongs to them while your character belongs to you. Life is shorter than the undisciplined mind assumes. Days disappear quickly. Years pass without warning. Do not spend this limited time carrying the weight of opinions that were never yours to carry. Return again and again to your own reason. Return again and again to honest self-examination. Return again and again to the discipline of questioning every judgment before accepting it. Then something remarkable begins to happen. The praise that once inflated you loses its power. The criticism that once disturbed you loses its grip. The approval you once chased becomes unnecessary. The fear you once obeyed becomes visible for what it is, and standing beneath all of it, you discover something stronger than public opinion and more reliable than reputation. You discover a mind capable of governing itself. That is where freedom begins. That is where strength begins. And that is where the examined life becomes possible. Number 3. Guard your attention from useless external noise. There is a difference between living and being carried. Most people believe they are directing their life because they are awake and moving through the day. But if you examine them closely, you will see that their attention is not under their command. It is pulled, it is dragged, it is constantly reacting to whatever appears loud enough to interrupt it. A notification, a rumor, a conversation that has nothing to do with their duty, a stream of information they did not ask for. a fragment of someone else's life that becomes more important than their own. This is not awareness. This is surrender. You do not suffer because the world is loud. You suffer because your attention has not been trained to refuse what does not belong to you. Every moment you allow your mind to be pulled without reason, you are teaching yourself that anything external has authority over your inner life. That is the real loss. Not time, not opportunity, but sovereignty over attention. Attention is the first possession of a disciplined mind. Without it, no virtue can be practiced with stability. Without it, reason cannot hold its ground. Without it, even good intentions dissolve into distraction. You may wish to live wisely, but if your attention is scattered across things that do not require your response, your life becomes a sequence of interruptions rather than a coherent act of character. Look at how easily the mind opens itself. It does not question what enters. It accepts noise as if all input deserves equal value. It treats trivial matters with the same urgency as essential ones. It allows emotion to be triggered by events that have no connection to its moral purpose. This is why people feel exhausted without knowing why. The mind has been working constantly, but not on anything it has chosen. A disciplined life begins when you decide that not everything deserves access to your awareness. The external world will never stop producing noise. That is not its task. Its task is not to preserve your clarity. Its task is simply to exist as it is. People will speak without thinking. Information will multiply without restraint. Opinions will circulate without responsibility. Events will continue unfolding without regard for your focus. If you attempt to keep pace with all of it, you abandon your own life entirely. You were not designed to absorb everything. You were designed to choose, and choice begins with refusal. The first act of guarding attention is learning to say no without explanation. No to conversations that drain clarity. No to content that produces agitation without purpose. No to curiosity that leads nowhere useful. No to the habit of checking what does not matter. No to the reflex of reacting before understanding. Every unnecessary engagement weakens the structure of the mind. Every refusal strengthens it. Most people never notice how often they abandon themselves in small moments. They open their mind to anything because it feels harmless. They tell themselves it is only a few seconds of distraction, but seconds accumulate into patterns. Patterns become temperament. Temperament becomes life. You do not become unfocused in a single moment. You become unfocused through permission repeated without awareness. Consider what happens when attention is constantly interrupted. The mind loses depth. It stops holding ideas long enough to examine them fully. It becomes reactive instead of reflective. It begins to depend on stimulation rather than reasoning. Eventually, silence feels uncomfortable because silence forces the mind to meet itself without distraction. This is why many people avoid stillness. Not because stillness is empty, but because stillness is revealing. When external noise fades, internal disorder becomes visible, and most people are not prepared for that visibility. So they return to noise quickly, not out of need, but out of avoidance. This is the cycle that weakens attention. Not external chaos alone, but internal reluctance to remain with oneself. The disciplined mind breaks this cycle deliberately. It learns to stay where it is placed. It does not chase every signal. It does not answer every interruption. It does not treat every stimulus as a command. It evaluates before engaging. It asks whether attention is required or whether attention is being stolen. This evaluation must become instant, not slow reasoning after regret, but immediate recognition in the moment of interruption. Ask yourself, when something demands your focus, does this belong to my purpose right now? If it does not, it is noise. Noise is not only sound or media. Noise is anything that consumes attention without improving judgment or strengthening character. It can be a conversation that leads to no clarity. It can be a thought loop that produces no solution. It can be an emotional reaction that changes nothing. It can be information that adds volume, but not understanding. A mind filled with noise cannot hear itself think, and a mind that cannot hear itself think cannot guide action. You must understand that attention is not passive. It is a form of governance. Whatever you attend to becomes larger within your perception. Whatever you ignore begins to lose influence. This means your life is shaped not only by what you pursue, but by what you repeatedly refuse. Each moment of attention is a vote. You are voting for what matters by what you allow into your awareness. If you vote without awareness, you build a life directed by chance. If you vote with discipline, you build a life directed by reason. The difference is not abstract. It is felt in every hour of your day. A scattered mind wakes already reacting. It checks external updates before it checks internal direction. It looks outward before it looks inward. It searches for something new before it understands what is already present. This creates instability because the center of attention is never fixed. A disciplined mind begins differently. Before engaging the world, it stabilizes itself. It asks what kind of attention is required today. It defines the purpose of the day before allowing external input to interfere with it. This is not rigidity, it is protection of clarity. The morning is where attention is either claimed or surrendered. If you begin your day by consuming external noise, you start in reaction. You place your mind into a state shaped by others before you have formed your own direction. If instead you begin in silence, you give yourself space to decide what deserves attention and what does not. In that silence, examine what is actually necessary for your role as a rational being. Not what is urgent in appearance, but what is essential in truth. Your duties, your responsibilities, your commitments, your principles. These are the fixed points. Everything else is secondary. Once you have identified what matters, protect it fiercely from intrusion. Throughout the day, interruptions will appear disguised as importance. They will present themselves as urgent, as interesting, as socially required. But urgency is often an illusion created by other people's attention spans, not by reality. The disciplined mind does not respond to urgency alone. It responds to relevance. There is a simple question that must become habitual. Does this improve my capacity to act with wisdom right now? If the answer is no, it is noise. At first, this practice feels uncomfortable because it breaks habit. The mind is used to constant engagement. It has been trained to react quickly and often without reflection. But discomfort is not a sign of error. It is a sign of restructuring. You are rebuilding the conditions of attention. There will be moments when you feel the pull to check something irrelevant. A message, a distraction, a detail that has no connection to your responsibilities. In those moments, pause and observe the impulse itself. You will notice that it rises quickly and fades quickly if not obeyed. Most impulses survive only when fed by immediate action. This is a critical realization. You are not obligated to act on every internal signal. Thought is not command. It is material for judgment. External noise loses power the moment you stop treating it as authority. As attention becomes more stable, something subtle begins to change. You start to notice time differently. Hours feel more continuous. Work becomes deeper. Conversations become clearer. Even silence becomes more comfortable. This is not because the world has changed, but because your perception is no longer fragmented. A fragmented mind experiences life as scattered moments. A focused mind experiences life as coherent action. Guarding attention is therefore not about restriction. It is about returning to ownership. It is about taking back what was always meant to be directed by reason rather than pulled by noise. Even emotions become more manageable when attention is disciplined. Many emotional disturbances are intensified not by their origin, but by the attention repeatedly returned to them. A thought appears, and instead of passing through, it is examined, replayed, expanded, and reinforced. In this way, noise becomes internal as well as external. The disciplined mind does not feed what is unhelpful. It acknowledges and releases. This is not suppression, it is clarity. Suppression fights experience. Clarity observes it without unnecessary extension. As this practice deepens, you begin to see external noise for what it truly is, not a threat, but a test of attention. Every interruption becomes an opportunity to practice refusal. Every distraction becomes an opportunity to strengthen direction. Every irrelevant demand becomes an opportunity to return to purpose. You are not trying to eliminate noise from the world. You are training yourself to remain untouched by what does not require your participation. There is great strength in this position, not the strength of resistance, but the strength of stability. A stable mind does not need to argue with noise. It simply does not absorb it, and in that stability, something essential becomes possible. You begin to live according to reason instead of reaction. You begin to act deliberately instead of impulsively. You begin to build days that are shaped by choice rather than interruption. This is how attention becomes freedom, not by controlling everything outside you, but by refusing to be controlled by everything outside you. Guard it carefully, not because the world is dangerous, but because your life depends on what you allow into your mind. And once attention is protected, everything built upon it becomes stronger, clearer, and more aligned with the life you are capable of living when nothing unnecessary is allowed to take your place within it. Dhintul sim bors, thairi thain dhintul sim pau. Number 4. Discipline your reactions before answering any criticism. There is a moment that reveals more about your character than any success or failure you will ever experience. It is not when you are praised. It is not when you are ignored. It is not when life is comfortable or predictable. It is the moment someone criticizes you. In that instant, something happens before you have chosen anything. A movement inside the mind begins without permission. The body tightens, the thoughts accelerate. A defense forms, a counter-argument appears. A need to justify yourself rises quickly, as if your survival depends on correcting another person's perception of you. Most people believe this reaction is natural and therefore acceptable. But natural does not mean disciplined. Natural does not mean true. Natural simply means untrained. If you do not learn to govern this moment, you are not living with reason. You are living as a reaction to other minds. Criticism is not what disturbs you. The disturbance begins in the interpretation you attach to it. A person speaks, that is all, but your mind immediately builds meaning, assigns intent, predicts consequences, and decides what it says about your worth. This construction happens so quickly that you mistake it for reality itself. The disciplined life begins when you interrupt this automatic construction. Before you answer any criticism, you must first become aware that you are reacting. This awareness is the first act of mastery. Without it, you are carried by impulse. With it, you begin to stand apart from it. Most people never pause. They respond immediately because silence feels like surrender. They believe that delay means weakness, but in truth, immediate reaction is a form of surrender to impulse. It is the mind obeying the first emotional signal without examination. A governed mind does not respond first. It observes first. When criticism reaches you, treat it as raw material rather than verdict. It is information entering your awareness, not a final judgment on your character. The undisciplined mind treats it as identity. The disciplined mind treats it as data. There is a critical distinction here. You are not required to accept every judgment that enters your awareness. You are required to examine it. Ask yourself in that moment a simple question that cuts through emotional distortion. Is this within my control to correct, or is it only another person's perception? If it is within your control, then you now have a task, not an emotional reaction, but a rational adjustment. Improvement replaces defensiveness. Learning replaces resistance. If it is outside your control, then it has no authority over your inner state. Another person's interpretation of you cannot harm your character unless you grant it power through agreement. This is where most suffering begins. People do not distinguish between what is actionable and what is merely expressive. They treat every criticism as something that must be either accepted or fought. Both responses give it more importance than it deserves. A disciplined mind does neither. It evaluates. There is a second movement required before response. You must examine your initial emotional impulse without acting on it. This is not suppression, it is recognition. You allow the reaction to exist without letting it govern your behavior. You will notice that most emotional reactions weaken when they are not immediately expressed. They rely on urgency to maintain strength. When you remove urgency, you reveal their temporary nature. Anger feels powerful only when it is obeyed instantly. When it is observed with delay, it becomes smaller. This is why discipline is not about never feeling reaction. It is about refusing to obey reaction before reason has had its place. The moment between hearing criticism and responding to it is the most important space in your inner life. It is the point where freedom either remains intact or is surrendered. If you respond immediately, you allow emotion to speak on your behalf. If you pause, you restore authority to reason. Most people live their entire lives without protecting this space. They allow words from others to pass directly into behavior without internal examination. They speak defensively before understanding what they are defending. They justify themselves before determining whether justification is even necessary. This creates unnecessary conflict, not because others are always wrong, but because the response is unexamined. A disciplined person trains a different sequence. First comes awareness of the impression, then comes separation from the impression, then comes evaluation of truth, then comes deliberate response if needed. Nothing is automatic. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is governed by impulse alone. This structure must be practiced daily, not only in moments of conflict. The mind trained only during crisis fails under pressure. The mind trained in ordinary situations remains stable when tested. Begin each morning by preparing for criticism, not by expecting it with anxiety, but by acknowledging its inevitability. People will interpret your actions without full understanding. They will speak from incomplete knowledge. They will project their assumptions onto your behavior. This is not unusual. It is human. The question is not how to prevent it. The question is how to meet it without losing yourself. Before entering your day, remind yourself that your worth is not under public negotiation. Your character is not decided in conversation. Your integrity is not assigned by approval or disapproval. These things belong to your choices alone. Then commit to a rule for the day. You will not respond to criticism before examining it. Not once. Not even in small matters. Especially not in small matters, because that is where habits are formed. During the day, when criticism appears, use the pause deliberately. Even a brief silence is enough to interrupt the automatic chain of reaction. In that silence, observe your internal state. Notice the desire to defend. Notice the desire to correct immediately. Notice the discomfort of not reacting. These observations are part of training. You are not trying to eliminate discomfort. You are learning not to obey it. Then ask a second question. What is actually being challenged here? My character or my expectation of how I should be seen? Often it is not character that is threatened, but image. People feel wounded not because their virtue is under attack, but because their perception of themselves in the eyes of others is disturbed. This is why criticism feels so heavy. It is not the content alone, but the imagined loss of approval. Once you see this clearly, you begin to separate identity from perception. Your identity is formed by your actions and choices. Perception is formed by limited observation from others. These are not the same thing. A stable mind is not dependent on being understood perfectly. A stable mind is committed to acting correctly, regardless of whether it is understood. When you respond from this foundation, your words change. They become less defensive. They become more precise. You no longer speak to protect ego. You speak to express truth or correct action if necessary. This reduces unnecessary conflict and strengthens clarity in communication. There will be times when criticism contains truth. The disciplined mind does not resist this possibility. It welcomes correction when it improves conduct. To reject all criticism blindly is as unbalanced as accepting all criticism without thought. Both are forms of weakness. One is rigidity. The other is surrender. The goal is discernment. Truth must be extracted without emotional interference. Falsehood must be released without emotional disturbance. This requires practice because the mind naturally prefers emotional justification. It wants to either agree with criticism to avoid conflict or reject it to protect pride. Both tendencies bypass examination. When you begin to live this discipline, you will notice a change in how you relate to people. Conversations become calmer. Conflicts lose intensity. Your need to defend every statement decreases. You stop treating every disagreement as a threat to identity. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement with clarity. Even silence becomes a tool. There are moments when the most disciplined response is no immediate response at all. Silence creates space for understanding. It prevents unnecessary escalation. It allows reason to return before speech begins. Many problems in life are created not by criticism itself, but by unexamined reaction to criticism. Words spoken too quickly often contain more emotion than truth. Words withheld long enough for reflection often contain more truth than emotion. This is why discipline before response is essential. It protects both your character and your relationships from unnecessary damage. As you continue this practice, something deeper changes. You begin to see criticism not as interruption, but as opportunity for observation. Each instance becomes a chance to examine your internal state. Each moment becomes training in self-governance. Eventually, the fear of criticism begins to weaken, not because you become indifferent, but because you become stable. When your sense of self is anchored in reason and action rather than opinion, external judgment loses its capacity to disturb you. You are no longer reacting to preserve image. You are acting to preserve integrity. This is the foundation of a disciplined life, not the absence of criticism, but the mastery of response. Not control over others, but control over the interval between impression and action. In that interval, your entire freedom exists. And every time you choose reflection before reaction, you strengthen the part of you that cannot be shaken by what others say, only by how you choose to answer it. Number 5. Withdraw your approval from those seeking control. There is a subtle form of surrender that most people practice without ever naming it. It does not look like obedience. It does not look like weakness. It often appears as agreement, politeness, tolerance, or the desire to avoid conflict. But beneath it, something deeper is happening. You are giving approval to people who are actively trying to shape your mind, your emotions, and your decisions for their own advantage. Not every form of control is loud. Some of it arrives gently. It arrives through persuasion that bypasses reason. It arrives through pressure disguised as concern. It arrives through confidence that demands agreement. It arrives through repetition that slowly wears down resistance. And every time you give approval without examination, you strengthen that influence over yourself. This is why the disciplined life requires a harder action than most people are willing to take. You must learn to withdraw approval from anything that attempts to govern your mind without reason. Approval is not a neutral act. It is not passive. It is a form of internal consent. Whatever you approve, you strengthen. Whatever you repeatedly accept without judgment, you allow to become a guiding force in your life. Most people are unaware of how often they grant this consent. They agree not because they have examined something, but because they want acceptance. They conform not because they are convinced, but because they want comfort. They follow not because something is right, but because it feels socially easier than resisting. This is how control enters the mind without force. You do not need chains to be controlled. You only need repeated agreement without reflection. Look at your daily interactions. How often do you allow someone else's certainty to override your own reasoning? How often do you abandon your judgment because another person speaks with confidence? How often do you accept opinions not because they are true, but because they are delivered with pressure, urgency, or authority? Every time this happens, your inner authority weakens. The disciplined mind does not grant approval automatically. It pauses, it examines, it asks whether what is being presented aligns with reason, or whether it is attempting to bypass reason entirely. This distinction is essential. There are people who offer guidance, and there are people who seek control through guidance. The difference is not always in what is said, but in the effect it has on your ability to think independently. Anything that demands immediate agreement without space for reflection is not inviting understanding. It is seeking submission. You must learn to recognize this instantly. The moment you feel pressure to agree without examination, your awareness should sharpen. That pressure is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a signal that your judgment is being bypassed. A rational mind does not collapse under pressure. It slows down. When you withdraw approval, you are not rejecting all input. You are refusing automatic submission. You are refusing to let external influence replace internal reasoning. You are restoring the proper order where your mind evaluates before it agrees. Most people do the opposite. They agree first and think later. By the time reflection arrives, the agreement has already shaped their behavior. This reversal creates confusion because actions are taken without full understanding. A disciplined person reverses this pattern. No agreement is given without evaluation. No influence is accepted without inspection. No direction is followed without reason. This does not make a person closed. It makes them stable. There is a difference between openness and vulnerability to control. Openness is the willingness to consider ideas with reason. Vulnerability is the habit of accepting ideas without reason. One strengthens understanding, the other weakens independence. Many people mistake compliance for harmony. They believe that agreeing with others quickly creates peace, but peace built on unexamined agreement is fragile. It lasts only until the next demand appears, then another adjustment is required, then another compromise of judgment. Slowly the self becomes fragmented, shaped more by external expectation than internal principle. The result is not harmony. It is loss of direction. To withdraw approval is to restore direction. You must begin to observe the emotional pressure that accompanies attempts at control. Often it appears as urgency. You are told something must be decided now. You are told hesitation means ignorance. You are told questioning means resistance. These are not logical statements. They are psychological pressures designed to reduce reflection. Reason does not fear delay. Control does. When something is true, it does not require rushed acceptance. It can withstand examination. It remains stable under scrutiny. It does not depend on urgency to survive. This is how you distinguish guidance from control. Ask yourself when pressured, does this still hold truth when I slow down? If the answer depends on speed, then it is not grounded in reason. Another form of control appears through emotional expectation. You are made to feel that disagreement is disrespectful, that questioning is disloyal, that independent judgment is arrogance. These emotional framings are designed to replace reason with guilt. But virtue is not obedience. Virtue is right action guided by reason. If you abandon reason to avoid emotional discomfort, you are not acting with virtue. You are reacting to pressure. The disciplined mind does not allow guilt to replace judgment. There will be situations where withdrawal of approval creates discomfort in others. This is unavoidable. A mind that no longer agrees automatically will disturb those who rely on automatic agreement. But discomfort in others is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is evidence that independence is being exercised. You are not responsible for maintaining everyone's expectation of agreement. You are responsible for maintaining clarity in your own judgment. This is a difficult distinction for many to accept because they have been trained to prioritize external harmony over internal truth. But external harmony without internal truth is unstable. It collapses whenever pressure increases. True stability comes from alignment with reason, not alignment with expectation. Begin each morning by setting a quiet intention. You will not grant approval automatically today. You will observe before agreeing. You will examine before aligning. You will think before yielding. This is not hostility toward others. It is discipline toward your own judgment. Then move into the day with awareness of moments where agreement is expected. Notice how often you are invited to confirm ideas without reflection. Notice how often agreement is assumed before understanding is complete. These are the points where your attention must sharpen. At each moment, introduce a pause. In that pause, ask whether your approval is being requested or extracted. If it is requested, reason may guide your response. If it is extracted, reason must first reclaim space. This practice will initially feel slow because you are breaking a habit of automatic alignment. But what feels like slowness is actually the return of control over thought. As you continue this discipline, something important becomes clear. Many influences lose power not because you oppose them, but because you stop feeding them with immediate agreement. Without approval, pressure weakens. Without reinforcement, control loses structure. Without your consent, external influence becomes only suggestion rather than direction. This shift is subtle but powerful. You begin to notice that your mind feels less scattered. Fewer internal conflicts arise because fewer external voices are being absorbed without examination. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer layered with unexamined expectations from others. Your sense of direction becomes more stable because it is no longer constantly adjusted by external approval cycles. You also begin to see relationships more clearly. Some people respect reasoning and allow space for it. Others rely on quick agreement and become unsettled when it is not given. This distinction reveals something important. Not all influence is neutral. Some relationships encourage independence. Others rely on compliance. A disciplined person does not reject relationships. They simply stop participating in relationships that require abandonment of reason. This is not separation from people. It is separation from unexamined influence. When approval is no longer automatic, you regain the ability to see situations clearly. You can still listen, you can still consider, you can still engage, but none of it bypasses your judgment. Nothing enters your life without passing through reason first. This is how inner freedom is preserved. Freedom is not the absence of influence. Influence will always exist. Freedom is the ability to choose which influence becomes action. When approval is withdrawn from control-based influence, something essential is restored. Your mind becomes a place of evaluation rather than absorption. You are no longer shaped unconsciously by external pressure. You are shaped consciously by reasoned choice. And in that shift, you begin to live with a kind of stability that cannot be achieved through agreement alone. Because stability does not come from aligning with everything around you. It comes from refusing to lose alignment with yourself. Number 6. Strengthen your character through deliberate, silent restraint. There is a strength that does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It does not rush to be understood. It does not compete for attention. It does not prove itself in the moment of impulse. It appears in restraint. Most people misunderstand restraint because they confuse silence with absence. They believe that if something is not expressed immediately, it is not present. But the disciplined mind understands something deeper. What is not expressed can still be fully controlled. What is not spoken can still be fully mastered. What is held back by reason is not lost. It is governed. Your life has likely been shaped more by unrestrained impulse than by deliberate choice. Words spoken too quickly, reactions released without reflection, complaints voiced without necessity, emotional responses that arrive before understanding. Each of these moments seems small, yet together they form the structure of character, not what you intend to be, but what you repeatedly express without control. Silent restraint is the interruption of this pattern. It is the decision to delay expression until reason has had its full say. It is the refusal to allow every thought to become speech. It is the refusal to allow every emotion to become action. It is the discipline of holding space between impulse and expression long enough for clarity to emerge. Most people do not realize how often they betray their own clarity by speaking too quickly. A reaction arises and immediately becomes language, but once spoken, it cannot be recalled. Once expressed, it becomes part of the external world. Once released, it begins to shape consequences that the mind must later manage. Silent restraint prevents this unnecessary expansion of disorder. Before speaking, the disciplined person asks a question that most minds skip entirely. Is this necessary, or is it only urgent in appearance? Urgency is often a disguise. It creates the illusion that immediate expression is required, but many things that feel urgent are only temporary emotional signals. They rise quickly and fade quickly, if not fed by action. Silent restraint allows these signals to pass without turning them into consequences. This practice is not suppression. Suppression fights against internal movement. Restraint simply refuses premature expression. It allows thought to mature before being released into action. There is a difference between a reaction that is expressed immediately and a judgment that is formed after reflection. One is unstable because it is born from emotion. The other is stable because it is formed through reason. Silent restraint creates the conditions for reason to take priority. Without restraint, the mind becomes externally driven. Every situation produces immediate output. Every feeling becomes expression. Every discomfort becomes complaint. Every disagreement becomes argument. In this state, the individual is not governing life. They are broadcasting it. And what is broadcast without reflection often reveals more confusion than truth. To strengthen character, you must reduce unnecessary expression. Not because expression is wrong, but because unexamined expression weakens discipline. The goal is not silence as an identity, but silence as a tool of clarity. When you withhold immediate reaction, you begin to see the structure of your own thinking more clearly. You notice how quickly judgments form. You notice how easily emotions attempt to take command. You notice how often speech is used not to communicate truth, but to release internal pressure. Silent restraint reveals these patterns. And once they are seen, they can be corrected. Begin in the morning by setting a simple internal standard. You will not speak faster than your reason can evaluate. This does not mean speaking slowly in time. It means refusing to speak from the first movement of emotion. It means allowing a pause between perception and expression, even if that pause is only a moment. That moment is where discipline begins. Throughout the day, you will encounter situations that invite immediate reaction. Someone says something careless, someone interrupts your plans, someone misunderstands your intention, someone behaves in a way that triggers irritation. In each of these moments, the undisciplined mind rushes to respond. It believes that expression is necessary for relief, but relief achieved through immediate reaction is temporary. It resolves emotional pressure, but often creates new disorder. Words spoken without reflection may satisfy emotion, but disturb reason. Silent restraint chooses differently. It prioritizes stability over release. In that brief pause before responding, observe what is actually happening within you. You will often find that the emotional intensity is stronger than the situation requires. The mind exaggerates significance. It transforms small disturbances into large ones through rapid interpretation. Silence interrupts this exaggeration. When you do not immediately respond, the emotion loses momentum. What felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What felt urgent becomes optional. What felt necessary to express becomes unnecessary once clarity returns. This is one of the hidden strengths of restraint. It allows reality to correct emotional distortion before action is taken. There will be moments when silence feels uncomfortable. The mind may interpret it as weakness or hesitation, but this interpretation comes from habit, not from reason. Habit prefers immediate release. Reason prefers accurate action. The discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that the mind is being retrained. A disciplined person is not defined by how quickly they respond, but by how accurately they respond. Accuracy requires time. Another essential aspect of silent restraint is learning to observe internal speech without expressing it outwardly. Much of what the mind generates does not require externalization. Many thoughts are incomplete, reactive, or unnecessary. If every thought becomes speech, the mind never develops the ability to refine itself internally. Silent restraint creates internal refinement. It forces the mind to evaluate its own output before it becomes action. Over time, this practice strengthens character in a way that external achievement cannot. It builds a gap between impulse and behavior. Within that gap, reason becomes active. And when reason is active, choice becomes deliberate rather than automatic. This is where true self-governance emerges, not in controlling the world around you, but in controlling the speed at which your inner world becomes action. A person without restraint is constantly exposed. Their inner state is immediately visible in speech and behavior. They have no space between feeling and expression. This makes them vulnerable to manipulation, misunderstanding, and regret. Their life becomes reactive because nothing is filtered through reflection. A person with restraint becomes less exposed but more stable. Their inner life is not constantly projected outward. It remains within the domain of examination until it is ready to be expressed with purpose. This does not make them distant from life. It makes them deliberate within it. Silent restraint also transforms relationships. When you no longer react immediately, conversations change in quality. You listen more fully because you are not preparing instant response. You understand more clearly because you are not rushing to defend or assert. You respond less from emotion and more from reason. This reduces unnecessary conflict, not by avoiding truth, but by delivering truth without emotional excess. Many conflicts are not created by disagreement itself, but by unrestrained expression of disagreement. When restraint is present, disagreement becomes discussion rather than confrontation. To practice this daily, observe moments when you feel the urge to correct, interrupt, or respond immediately. In those moments, choose delay. Even a brief pause is enough to shift control from impulse to reason. During that pause, ask whether expression is required for virtue or only for emotional release. If it is only emotional release, let it pass internally without external expression. This is not suppression of truth, it is protection of clarity. At the end of each day, review moments where restraint was lost. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe precisely. Identify where reaction preceded reflection. Identify where speech was faster than understanding. Identify where emotional urgency replaced rational evaluation. This examination is not about regret. It is about recognition. Recognition is what allows correction. Over time, you will notice that restraint begins to create a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence of loud expression, but the confidence of measured response. You no longer feel compelled to fill silence. You no longer feel pressured to respond instantly. You no longer fear that delay reduces your authority. Instead, you understand that authority over self is revealed in the ability to pause. As this discipline strengthens, your life becomes less fragmented. Fewer unnecessary words are spoken. Fewer unnecessary conflicts are created. Fewer unnecessary reactions drain your attention. The mind becomes clearer because it is no longer constantly externalizing every impulse. In this clarity, reason becomes more accessible, choices become more deliberate, actions become more aligned with principle rather than impulse. Silent restraint is not withdrawal from life. It is refinement of participation in life. It is the practice of ensuring that what leaves you has first been examined by reason. And when reason governs expression, character begins to take shape not through what you say in every moment, but through what you choose not to say until it is worthy of being spoken. Number 7. Accept being misunderstood without surrendering your virtue. There is a specific kind of suffering that does not come from events themselves, but from the demand to be understood correctly by every person who observes you. You may act with care, speak with intention, and choose with reason, yet still be seen incorrectly. Your meaning can be distorted, your motives can be reduced, your actions can be judged without full awareness of what led to them. And in that moment, the mind that is not trained begins to resist reality itself. This resistance is where unnecessary suffering begins. You are not disturbed by being misunderstood. You are disturbed by the belief that being misunderstood should not happen if you are good, reasonable, or careful enough. That belief is not part of reason. It is an expectation placed upon life that life was never required to fulfill. Human judgment is limited. It observes fragments, not the whole structure of intention. It sees outcomes, not inner reasoning. It reacts to appearances, not full context. If you depend on universal understanding, you are depending on something unstable by nature. The disciplined mind removes this dependency. It does not abandon clarity. It does not stop communicating truth. It simply stops requiring perfect interpretation as a condition for inner peace. Your virtue does not depend on being correctly perceived. It depends on how you choose to act when perception is incorrect. Most people unknowingly surrender their stability in moments of misunderstanding. They rush to correct every false impression. They over-explain. They defend beyond necessity. They replay conversations internally, trying to reconstruct how they should have been seen. In doing so, they place their inner state under the control of external judgment. This is not correction. This is attachment. The desire to be perfectly understood is often mistaken for justice, but there is a difference between seeking truth and demanding recognition of truth from every observer. One belongs to reason, the other belongs to ego's need for validation. You must separate these two movements in the mind. If correction is required to preserve honesty or responsibility, then it should be made calmly and without emotional urgency. But if correction is pursued only to secure approval or erase discomfort, then it is no longer governed by reason, it is governed by dependence. A disciplined person understands that misunderstanding from others does not cancel right action, it does not undo virtue, it does not redefine character, it only reveals the limits of external perception. And limits of perception are not your responsibility to control. Your responsibility is simpler and stricter at the same time. Act with clarity, choose with reason, maintain integrity in private and public conduct, then accept that outcomes of perception belong to others, not to your moral identity. When you are misunderstood, the first movement of the mind will often be discomfort. That discomfort is natural, but it is not authoritative. It is a signal, not a command. If you obey it immediately, you begin to act from instability rather than reason. Instead of reacting, pause long enough to distinguish what has actually occurred. A judgment has been formed by another mind. That is all. Everything beyond that is interpretation happening within your own response. Ask yourself in that moment whether your virtue has actually been violated or whether your image has been challenged. Most suffering arises because these two are confused. Image belongs to perception, virtue belongs to conduct. One is external and variable, the other is internal and governed by choice. When image is mistaken for virtue, misunderstanding feels like harm. When they are separated, misunderstanding becomes irrelevant to moral integrity. This separation must be practiced repeatedly until it becomes natural. At the beginning of each day, prepare the mind for the reality that not all actions will be seen correctly. This is not pessimism, it is accuracy. Human attention is limited. Context is often missing. Interpretations will form without full understanding. Expecting otherwise creates fragility. Instead, set a different standard for yourself. You will act according to reason regardless of whether it is fully understood. This removes dependency on recognition and replaces it with stability in conduct. Throughout the day, observe moments when the desire to be understood begins to arise. It often appears subtly. You may feel an urge to clarify something that does not require clarification. You may feel tension when someone misinterprets your intention. You may feel the need to correct assumptions that do not affect any meaningful outcome. In these moments, examine whether action is truly necessary or whether emotional discomfort is requesting relief through explanation. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Some misunderstandings resolve themselves with time. Others remain irrelevant to your actual duties. A disciplined mind does not spend energy correcting every distortion of perception. It focuses on maintaining correct action. There is a deeper discipline required here. You must learn to tolerate the existence of incorrect impressions without allowing them to alter your conduct. This is where most people lose stability. They begin to adjust behavior based on how they are being perceived, rather than how they have reasoned they should act. When this happens, life becomes reactive to perception instead of grounded in principle. You begin to shape yourself not according to virtue, but according to avoidance of misunderstanding. This slowly weakens authenticity. The fear of being seen incorrectly becomes stronger than the commitment to acting correctly. To prevent this, you must return constantly to a single question. Is my action aligned with reason right now, regardless of how it may be interpreted? If the answer is yes, then misunderstanding loses its authority. If the answer is no, then correction is needed, but not because of perception, because of principle. This is a crucial distinction. You do not adjust your character to fix other people's interpretations. You adjust your character to align with reason. When this distinction becomes clear, emotional turbulence around misunderstanding begins to fade. You still notice it, but it no longer governs your state of mind. You begin to see that interpretation is fluid while virtue is stable. Interpretation changes from person to person and moment to moment. Virtue remains defined by your choices alone. A person who depends on universal understanding becomes fragile because they are dependent on something inconsistent. A person who depends on reason becomes stable because reason does not shift based on audience. This stability does not create isolation. It creates clarity. You are still able to communicate, to explain when necessary, and to correct when justified. But none of these actions arise from emotional dependence on approval. They arise from rational evaluation. Over time, something important happens internally. The urgency to be perfectly understood weakens. You begin to recognize that many misunderstandings are temporary, and many are irrelevant to the quality of your life. You stop expanding emotional energy to repair every distortion of perception. Instead, you invest that energy into maintaining consistent action. Even relationships begin to change in structure. You become less reactive to misinterpretation. You speak more clearly because you are not speaking under pressure to be perfectly received. You act more consistently because you are not adjusting behavior for every possible interpretation. This creates a steadier form of interaction, not based on controlling how others see you, but on controlling how you conduct yourself. There will still be moments when misunderstanding feels heavy, especially when it involves people whose opinion you value. In those moments, the temptation to overcorrect will be strong, but this is where discipline is tested. You must decide whether your stability depends on their perception or on your reasoned understanding of your actions. If it depends on perception, you remain vulnerable to every misinterpretation. If it depends on reason, you remain steady even in confusion. The mind that chooses reason over perception does not need to eliminate misunderstanding from life. It only needs to ensure that misunderstanding does not dictate behavior. This is where true independence develops. Not independence from people, but independence from the need to be perfectly interpreted by people. As this practice deepens, you begin to see misunderstandings not as personal threats, but as natural outcomes of limited perception. You stop internalizing them as reflections of your worth. You begin to see them as external events that do not penetrate the structure of your character. And in that recognition, something essential becomes clear. Your virtue was never dependent on being understood. It was always dependent on whether you chose reason when no one was watching, and whether you remained aligned with it even when no one understood why. Number 8. Direct your energy toward worthy actions daily. There is a difference between being busy and being directed. Most people confuse movement with meaning. They fill their day with actions that feel urgent, conversations that feel necessary, and distractions that feel harmless. Yet when the day ends, there is often a quiet recognition that nothing essential was built within it. Energy was spent, but nothing worthy was strengthened. This is not a failure of time. It is a failure of direction. Your energy is not scattered by accident. It is scattered because the mind has not been trained to distinguish between what is worthy and what is merely demanding attention. Every day presents countless opportunities to act, but not every action deserves your strength. Some actions build character, others drain it. Some actions align with reason, others arise from impulse, habit, or external pressure. A disciplined life begins when you stop treating all actions as equal. Worthy action is not defined by external reward. It is defined by internal alignment with reason and virtue. If an action strengthens clarity, discipline, responsibility, or integrity, it is worthy regardless of outcome. If an action exists only to relieve discomfort, avoid reflection, or satisfy impulse. It is not worthy even if it produces temporary satisfaction. Most people reverse this standard. They evaluate actions based on reward, recognition, or immediate relief. This is why their energy often feels exhausted but not fulfilled. They are active but not directed. You must examine how often your daily energy is spent reacting instead of choosing. How often do you respond to what is loud rather than what is necessary? How often do you engage in tasks because they appear urgent rather than because they are meaningful? How often do you allow external pressure to define your priorities instead of reason? Each moment of undirected action is a moment where life is shaped without intention. The disciplined mind does not begin the day by reacting to what appears first. It begins by identifying what is worthy before engagement begins. This requires clarity of judgment before activity starts. Without this clarity, the day becomes reactive by default. At the start of the day, the mind must be anchored in a simple but powerful distinction. Some things are within your control, some are not. Within what is controllable, further distinction is required. Some actions are aligned with reason, others are not. Not everything within your control deserves execution. Only what aligns with virtue deserves full commitment. This is where most people become confused. They assume that because something can be done, it should be done. But capability is not the same as worthiness. The ability to act does not guarantee that action is necessary or beneficial. A disciplined person evaluates before engaging. They do not allow energy to be released automatically into whatever appears first. They hold it until reason confirms direction. This holding is not hesitation, it is governance. Throughout the day, countless small invitations will arise, a distraction that feels slightly interesting, a task that feels slightly urgent, a conversation that feels slightly engaging but leads nowhere, a reaction that feels slightly justified but produces no improvement. Each of these moments asks for your energy without offering anything meaningful in return. If you respond to all of them, your life becomes fragmented. Fragmentation is not always visible in a single moment. It appears gradually. It appears as fatigue without achievement, as activity without clarity, as engagement without progress, as motion without purpose. The disciplined life is not defined by how much you do, but by how carefully you choose what deserves doing. Before any action, you must introduce a brief internal evaluation, not emotional evaluation, but rational evaluation. Ask whether this action contributes to the formation of a stronger character, or whether it only satisfies temporary impulse. If it strengthens discipline, clarity, or responsibility, it may be worthy. If it only disperses attention or relieves discomfort, it must be questioned. This practice slowly removes unnecessary actions from life, not because life becomes smaller, but because it becomes focused. A focused life does not feel rushed even when it is active. A scattered life feels rushed even in moments of rest. The difference lies in direction. When energy is directed toward worthy action, even difficult tasks feel meaningful because they are connected to principle. When energy is spent on unworthy action, even easy tasks feel draining because they are disconnected from purpose. You must learn to recognize this difference in real time. There is another subtle trap that drains energy without awareness. It is the tendency to act in response to emotional discomfort. When discomfort arises, the mind seeks immediate activity to escape it. This leads to unnecessary engagement, not because the action is required, but because silence feels uncomfortable. Worthy action does not arise from escape. It arises from intention. If an action is taken primarily to avoid thinking, avoid feeling, or avoid reflecting, then it is not directed by reason. It is directed by avoidance. and avoidance produces scattered living. The disciplined mind does not flee discomfort through unnecessary action. It observes discomfort, understands it, and only then chooses whether action is required. This allows energy to remain available for what is truly important. Each morning, before entering the demands of the day, you must set a clear internal orientation. You will not allow your energy to be consumed by whatever appears first. You will not equate urgency with importance. You will not equate stimulation with value. You will reserve your energy for actions that align with reasoned purpose. This orientation must be simple. The mind does not need complexity, it needs clarity. Throughout the day, continually return to this question. Is this use of energy aligned with what I have determined to be worthy, or is it simply a reaction to what is present? This question reintroduces direction whenever the mind begins to drift into automatic behavior. At times, you will notice resistance. The mind prefers easy engagement. It prefers immediate stimulation. It prefers actions that require less reflection. Worthy action often requires more discipline because it is not always the easiest or most immediately rewarding option. But difficulty is not a reason for avoidance. In fact, difficulty often reveals value. Actions that strengthen character rarely feel effortless in the moment. They require restraint, clarity, and persistence. Energy directed toward such actions becomes strengthening energy. Energy directed toward unworthy actions becomes dispersing energy. Over time, this distinction becomes visible in the structure of your life. A life filled with worthy action feels coherent. It feels aligned. It feels stable even under pressure. A life filled with unexamined action feels fragmented. It feels reactive. It feels unstable even during calm periods. The difference is not external circumstances, it is internal direction. You are not lacking energy, you are lacking governance of energy. When energy is governed by reason, even limited time produces meaningful outcomes. When energy is governed by impulse, even abundant time produces confusion. The disciplined life is built through repeated daily choices to align energy with worthiness rather than reaction. Each time you choose deliberate action over automatic reaction, you strengthen the structure of your character. Each time you refuse unnecessary engagement, you preserve clarity. Each time you direct effort toward what is truly necessary, you reinforce inner stability. There is no single moment where this transformation occurs. It is built through repetition, through small decisions made consistently, through daily refusal of what is unworthy, through daily commitment to what aligns with reason. Eventually, something changes in how you experience your own actions. You begin to feel less scattered internally. You begin to recognize that exhaustion decreases when energy is no longer wasted on unworthy engagement. You begin to see that clarity increases when actions are chosen rather than inherited from impulse. This is not a change in circumstance, it is a change in direction, and direction is what determines the quality of a life more than any external condition. When energy is consistently directed toward worthy action, life becomes less reactive and more intentional, less scattered and more unified, less driven by impulse and more governed by reason. And in that shift, you begin to understand that the true strength of a life is not measured by how much energy is used, but by how carefully that energy is chosen. Number 9. Govern your mind instead of chasing acceptance. There is a hidden tension in most lives that is rarely examined with honesty. On the surface, people say they want peace, clarity, and strength. But beneath that surface, many are governed by something far more fragile. They are governed by the need to be accepted, approved, included, and validated by minds outside their control. This need is not questioned. It is followed, and whatever is followed without examination becomes authority. You may think you are making choices freely, Yet much of what you do is shaped by the silent pressure to be seen in a favorable light. You adjust your words, you soften your truth, you delay decisions, you avoid standing apart, you repeat what others expect, you hesitate where reason would move forward. All of this is often justified as social awareness, but in reality it is frequently the surrender of inner governance. To govern your mind is to place reason above approval. Not sometimes, not when convenient, always, but most people invert this order. They allow acceptance to become the standard by which they measure their decisions. If approval is likely, they feel safe. If approval is uncertain, they feel unstable. If approval is denied, they feel diminished. In this structure, the mind is no longer self-directed. It becomes dependent on external response. This is not freedom. It is emotional outsourcing of judgment. You must examine how often your decisions are shaped not by what is correct, but by what will be received well. How often do you abandon clarity because it may create disagreement? How often do you remain silent, not because silence is wise, but because expression may disturb your image? How often do you act not from principle, but from anticipation of how you will be perceived afterward? Each of these moments shifts authority away from your reason and toward external reaction. The disciplined life requires a reversal of this pattern. Your mind must become the governing force of your actions, not the audience's response. Reason must determine direction before acceptance is even considered. If acceptance follows reason, it is secondary. If acceptance replaces reason, you are no longer governing yourself. This distinction is subtle but decisive. Acceptance is unpredictable. It depends on perception, mood, misunderstanding, and preference of others. It changes from person to person and moment to moment. If your inner stability depends on it, your life becomes unstable by design. Reason, however, is consistent when properly applied. It evaluates what is within your control and what is not. It examines whether an action aligns with virtue or deviates from it. It does not shift based on audience. It does not weaken under disagreement. It does not strengthen under praise. When you begin to govern your mind through reason, acceptance loses its authority over your decisions. This does not mean you become indifferent to others. It means you become independent of their approval as a condition for right action. Most suffering related to acceptance comes from a single misunderstanding. People believe that being accepted is proof of correctness, and being rejected is proof of error. But human judgment is not a reliable measure of truth. It is influenced by incomplete information, emotional bias, personal interest, and limited perspective. If you allow such judgment to determine your direction, you are placing your life under unstable guidance. The disciplined mind rejects this dependency. Instead of asking, "How will I be received?" it asks, "Is this aligned with reason?" Instead of asking, "Will I be approved?" it asks, "Is this the correct action?" Instead of asking, "Will I be included?" it asks, "Am I acting with integrity?" This shift reorients the entire structure of decision-making. You are no longer living in response to perception. You are living in alignment with principle. At the beginning of each day, the mind must be anchored in this distinction. Today, your goal is not to be universally accepted. Your goal is to act in accordance with reason regardless of acceptance. This removes confusion before it begins. It sets a boundary between internal governance and external reaction. When this boundary is clear, many unnecessary emotional reactions lose their influence before they arise. During the day, situations will appear that test this boundary. Moments where agreement would bring ease and disagreement would bring tension. Moments where silence would maintain approval and honesty would risk it. Moments where conformity would be simple and independence would be uncomfortable. These are not random events. They are opportunities to determine who governs your mind. In those moments, Observe the internal pressure carefully. You will notice a pull toward acceptance that feels immediate and strong. This pull is not reasoning, it is conditioning. It is the mind's habit of prioritizing social alignment over rational clarity. Pause long enough to separate feeling from judgment. Ask whether agreement is being chosen because it is correct or because it is comfortable. Ask whether silence is being chosen because it is wise or because it avoids discomfort. These questions restore clarity. A governed mind does not eliminate the desire for acceptance. It learns to recognize it without obeying it. This recognition creates space between impulse and action. In that space, reason can operate. Without that space, behavior is dictated by immediate emotional pressure. Many people never develop this space. They respond immediately to the need for approval. They shape their words in real time based on imagined reactions. They adjust themselves continuously to fit expectations that are never fully visible. In doing so, they lose coherence of self. The disciplined mind refuses this fragmentation. It does not allow external perception to rewrite internal direction. As this practice develops, something important begins to shift internally. The urgency of acceptance begins to weaken. You start to notice that approval, when pursued, is unstable and temporary. It depends on conditions outside your control. It changes rapidly. It requires constant adjustment. It never provides lasting stability. Reason, however, remains available regardless of external response. It does not depend on agreement to function. It does not require recognition to be valid. It is always present as long as you are willing to examine it honestly. This realization changes how decisions are experienced. You no longer feel compelled to secure approval before acting. You no longer delay clarity in anticipation of external reaction. You begin to act with greater independence because your standard has shifted from acceptance to correctness. At first, this may feel like separation from others, but in truth, it is separation from dependency, not from people. You can still listen, you can still consider, you can still engage, but none of these actions determine your inner direction. They are inputs, not authorities. Governance remains within reason. Over time, this creates a more stable internal condition. Emotional fluctuations tied to approval decrease. Anxiety related to perception reduces. Hesitation caused by fear of rejection weakens. You begin to act with greater steadiness because your actions are no longer negotiated with imagined judgment. Instead, they are determined by examined principle. There will still be moments of discomfort. Acting without reliance on acceptance often creates resistance from environments that expect conformity. But discomfort is not evidence of error. It is often evidence that independence of judgment is being exercised. A mind that requires acceptance to feel secure cannot act freely. A mind governed by reason can act correctly regardless of external response. This is the foundation of inner strength, not the absence of social interaction, not the rejection of others, but the refusal to let external validation determine internal direction. When acceptance is no longer the goal, something deeper becomes possible. Your actions begin to align more consistently with what is correct rather than what is popular. Your decisions become less reactive and more deliberate. Your sense of self becomes less dependent on shifting opinion and more rooted in stable reasoning. This is what it means to govern the mind. Not to silence the world, not to eliminate judgment, but to ensure that judgment does not replace reason. And when reason governs, acceptance becomes secondary, not essential. In that structure, you are no longer shaped by the need to be approved. You are shaped by the discipline of choosing correctly, even when no one agrees, and especially when no one is required to. Number 10. Anchor your peace within reason and virtue. Most people search for peace in the wrong place. They search for it in outcomes that shift without warning. They search for it in approval that depends on others. They search for it in circumstances that are never stable for long. And because they anchor their peace in what is external, their peace becomes unstable by design. This is why even a small disruption can feel overwhelming. Not because the event is large, but because the foundation supporting the mind is fragile. You have likely experienced this without naming it. A change in someone's tone alters your mood. A delay in results disturbs your focus. A disagreement unsettles your inner state. A moment of criticism lingers longer than reason allows. These reactions are not caused by the events themselves, but by where your peace is placed. When peace is placed in external things, you become dependent on conditions you cannot govern. Stoic discipline begins by moving that foundation inward. Peace must be anchored where instability cannot reach it. It must rest in reason and virtue, because these are the only elements of life that belong fully to you. Reason is the capacity to examine impressions before accepting them. Virtue is the commitment to choose correctly in accordance with that examination. Everything else is partially or completely outside your control. Yet most people invert this structure. They treat external conditions as if they determine internal stability, and they treat internal judgment as if it is secondary. This reversal produces constant disturbance because it ties inner life to outer fluctuation. You cannot control how events unfold. You cannot control how others behave. You cannot control how outcomes arrive or how quickly they change. But you can control how you interpret each moment. You can control whether you respond from reflection or reaction. You can control whether you act according to reason or impulse. This is where peace must be rooted, not in controlling life, but in governing response. The undisciplined mind does not see this clearly. It believes peace will come when conditions improve, when conflict ends, when recognition arrives, when uncertainty disappears, when difficulty is removed. But this belief creates a moving target. Life is always changing, so peace is always postponed. This is why many people feel as if peace is always just ahead of them, never present with them. The disciplined mind removes this illusion. Peace is not something that arrives when life becomes easier. It is something that emerges when judgment becomes disciplined. At the beginning of each day, the mind must be reminded of this separation. What is within your control and what is not? Within control, only two things matter in a Stoic sense: your judgments and your actions. Everything else is secondary. If your peace depends on anything beyond these, it is not anchored. It is exposed. Throughout the day, impressions will arise constantly. Some will be pleasant, some will be disruptive, some will feel urgent, some will feel significant. But none of them should be accepted automatically. Each impression must pass through reason before it becomes belief. This pause is where peace is preserved. Without it, impressions immediately become judgments, and judgments immediately become emotional reactions. The mind becomes reactive rather than reflective, and a reactive mind cannot maintain stability because it is constantly adjusting to external stimuli. To anchor peace within reason is to interrupt this automatic chain. When something happens, the first task is not reaction, it is recognition. What exactly is being presented? Is it an event, or is it my interpretation of an event? Most suffering arises in the interpretation, not in the event itself. Once you identify the impression, you must examine whether it belongs to what you control. If it does not, it should not be treated as a threat to inner stability. If it does, then it must be evaluated according to virtue. This simple structure eliminates unnecessary disturbance, but it must be practiced repeatedly until it becomes instinctive. Virtue, in this framework, is not abstract moral praise. It is practical alignment with reasoned action. It means choosing honesty when deception would be easier. It means choosing patience when reaction would be faster. It means choosing clarity when confusion would be more comfortable. It means choosing restraint when impulse is strong. Each of these choices strengthens the anchor of peace. Because peace is not maintained by avoiding difficulty, but by responding to difficulty with disciplined judgment. Most people attempt to protect peace by avoiding disruption, but avoidance does not create stability. It only delays exposure. True stability is created when the mind remains steady even within disruption. This is why reason and virtue must be combined. Reason evaluates what is happening. Virtue determines how to respond. When both are present, external conditions lose their power to dictate internal state. You begin to notice something subtle as this practice develops. Events that once triggered immediate disturbance begin to lose their emotional weight, not because they are less significant, but because they are no longer interpreted as threats to your inner order. You see them more clearly as external occurrences rather than personal destabilizers. This shift is essential. It means your peace is no longer dependent on the absence of disturbance. It is dependent on the quality of your judgment. Each morning, before engaging with the world, set a clear internal foundation. Today, your peace will not depend on outcomes. It will not depend on recognition. It will not depend on agreement or comfort. It will depend on your ability to maintain reasoned judgment and virtuous action in whatever appears. This preparation is not symbolic. It is structural. It defines how the mind will interpret events before they occur. During the day, return repeatedly to this foundation. When something challenges your stability, pause and ask whether your peace is being placed in something external or whether it is being maintained through reasoned response. This question restores alignment. Without this return, the mind gradually drifts back into dependence on external conditions. And with dependence comes instability. There will be moments when emotions rise strongly. In those moments, the mind will attempt to outsource peace to resolution of the external situation. It will say that peace will return once the situation changes, but this is a distortion. Peace does not depend on situation change. It depends on judgment discipline. If you obey emotional urgency, peace becomes conditional. If you remain with reason, peace remains available even within difficulty. This does not mean emotional disturbance disappears. It means it no longer governs behavior or identity. The disciplined mind observes disturbance without surrendering to it. As this practice deepens, you begin to see a fundamental truth. Most instability in life is not created by life itself, but by unexamined interpretation of life. The same event can produce calm in one person and chaos in another. The difference is not external, it is internal governance. One mind anchors itself in reason and virtue. The other anchors itself in outcome and perception. Only one of these anchors holds under pressure. Over time, anchoring peace within reason and virtue creates a steady internal condition that does not depend on favorable circumstances. Life continues to shift, situations continue to change, challenges continue to arise, but your inner state no longer rises and falls with each external movement. Instead, it remains tied to a stable reference point. Reason evaluates. Virtue responds. Peace follows not from control over life, but from correct participation within it. And when this becomes consistent, you realize something simple but profound. Peace was never something to chase in the world outside you. It was always something to anchor within the discipline of your own judgment and the integrity of your own actions.